and do that.
Another one,
But just don't sell any sandwiches.
I keep telling this to
That's
all of
how
my
messed
students.
up
If you just
the
want to
current
hard
situation
code,
is.
like I did, I was
The
a
good
computer
news
science major.
is
I was going to learn to be a
because it's so
programmer.
ridiculous,
If that's all you
there's
want to
a
do, we're going to need far fewer
rapidly
jobs
growing
in the future.
coalition
As AI gets better
across
and
the
better at
political
writing code.
spectrum,
Right now, people are still better.
all the way from
But
Bernie
at the
Sanders
national
to
level,
people like
to
Steve
the
Bannon
new
and
generation
saying
AI
this is
keeps
nuts.
getting better.
We
So
need
we'll still have
to
coding
in
jobs, but
2017
not as many going
outlined
forward.
treat
strategies
AI
to
companies
grow
like we would
AI
treat any other powerful
affecting
company.
all
Such
of
as
these
Saying,
areas.
hey,
introducing
we have
AI
these
in
safety
coding
standards
as we
primary
move
for
forward.
and
sandwiches, for
secondary
cars,
Just to
for
let you know,
medicines.
I'm not
You
only
can't release
as well
focused on
as
products
the
until
expansion
there's
of AI
standards.
programs at the
non-AI
college
topics.
level.
One of
way
them, if you
we
watched
get
some
raised
of
the
my
bar.
videos, you'll know
where
I'm a big fan
focus
of
can
these
focus
things
on
called
curing cancer and other
passkeys,
things
which
instead
are
of
a replacement for passwords.
absolutely
More secure, easier to keep up with,
insane in my opinion.
phishing resistant for
Ways
the
to
most part.
replace humans.
So
Not
passkeys,
just
and they
as
come to us from an organization called FIDO Alliance, Fast Identity Online. There's a lot of companies that have signed up for
Professor
this.
Tegner,
Just
just
to
we
name
see,
drop
for
a few,
example, Sam
Amazon,
Altman going from senator to
Target,
senator's
PayPal,
office, you know, after
Microsoft,
dealing with
etc.
his
Those are
rogue
all
agent that got
organizations
caught.
that are
Who
part of
knows
this. And the FIDO
what it
Alliance came out with a report that said
China
you
has
also have
93%
this
of accounts from
1,100
those
scientists and
organizations
senior employees
are
at top AI
eligible for
firms
passkeys.
calling
And
on the U.S.
that
government to back
exports
international
rare
efforts to
earth
develop
people
tools that
have
could
actually
made
enabled
from
those
these
as well.
materials to
When I
Russian
first
world's
started
most
talking about
advanced
passkeys, a
AI
lot of people
This
said,
was in
this doesn't work.
retaliation
What
to
about
Trump's
this? What
Trump
about
and
that?
Toad
It's got
saying we
problems.
can't
It's
regulate them
It's working.
because then
It's
that
working.
would
Large
put
companies
us
are
behind China.
IBM
If you can
internally,
again
we
explain
made
in
one
lay
switch to where
terms,
all
I mean, you're
employees have
talking
access
about a
authenticated
group of
into
senators
our
and
internal
Congress
systems.
members,
So we're
many of
using
them
this
quite
across
old,
the entire
not
company as well.
experienced in this at
And me
all.
personally, if I go into my
What
password
needs to be
manager, which is
regulated?
where
We
these
know
companies
that
store,
leaders
that
I've
the
got
shortage in supply of
17
such
passkeys
methods
trying to say
already,
we will
and I expect
regulate
it to grow over
ourselves.
time. So
What do you
I
think are
think
the most
passkeys
And so
important
this, as we've
areas
seen in the
to
negotiations
regulate?
What is
with
the
the
number
U.S., the
one-
trade negotiations,
As soon as we
this
start
is
treating AI
Chinese nuclear
companies
which are
option,
like
phishing
big
attacks,
pharma
basically go
which
to
in
companies
many
and
countries in the
cases
world
are
and say,
going
right?
after
And they will
if
not
we
be
can't
able
secure
to
passwords.
release their new
And
systems
you
will no
can't
longer
steal
supply
your
your
password
demonstrated.
if you don't have
shut
that.
down
A
certain
passkey is
industries.
They don't cause
and
kids to
robotics.
commit suicide or
confession
do all
time.
these other harms.
I built a time
And then the
machine
companies
and
themselves will
American
put in a
companies,
massive
however,
effort into making
have
their
an
things
edge
safer,
over
and they will
equity.
not
I found a
go into these
copy of the
pages.
latest
Stanford's
IBM
AI
It's
cost
very
report
data breach
easy. We've done this as a
2024.
society before.
American
There
else would a
private
security
AI
nerd
companies
investment
selling
was around
thalidomide,
$109 billion US
make
dollars.
babies be born without arms and legs.
Well,
When that
China,
industry was
meanwhile,
regulated,
top
we
causes
fixed this.
of
We
data
fixed
$9
it the
billion
same way.
was
And
quantum
then China,
tracking of
less.
conventional
the
cryptography.
dirty little
Unfortunately, I
secret
forgot to
that
note the
the
year of the
AI
report.
lobbyists
It slipped my mind.
don't mention
So
is
I won't be able to
that
tell
the
you
Chinese
exactly what
government
year that's going
really
to happen.
likes to be
But
in
I
control.
do know it wasn't all that far in the
And
future because there were no flying
We'll
cars.
never tolerate the
So
Chinese
the good
company
news,
making a
though,
new
is that
species
you
that's
can
going
do
to
something
overthrow
to avert
the
that
Chinese
disaster
government,
now
obviously.
by implementing what's known as quantum
This is very much a
cryptography,
red
or
herring.
some
In fact,
people
China
refer
has
to
already
it
cracked
as
down harder on
post-quantum
its
cryptography.
than America has on our
Now
companies.
you've seen what
They
my
crack down
crystal
hard
ball
on AI
sees happening in
girlfriends
cybersecurity
and other
in
State
2026
framework
funding
AI.
plays a
Now
significant
I'd like
role
to hear
in
Weeks ago,
China's AI
they have a law
robotics
saying that any
ecosystem.
AI
Beijing
generated
Beijing
content
is
has to be
established at
labeled,
$1
crystal balls
trillion
aren't
yuan,
perfect after all.
or
So I feel that this is more of a talking point
Almost all of
of
that
among the
in the
lobbyists.
comment
And
section
AI
below.
and
as soon as there's
robotics
any
startups.
We
real
can all look back
political will
and see how we
This
did.
mirrors the
to,
pathways of EVs, which benefited from strong
regulate
state
AI,
support.
it'll be quite
But
easy
Chinese
to
EVs
come
have
up with
faced
agreements
pushback in
with
Western
China.
markets,
We should
and the
remember
concerns
that,
over subsidies and
there's very
industrial
little
policy.
trust right now between the U.S.
2
and
years
China,
ago,
but there
I did a
wasn't a
video
whole
of
lot of
Chinese
trust
robots
either
encounter
between
similar resistance.
Leonid Brezhnev and Jimmy
Is there
Carter,
really
right?
a
And that
market
did not
for
prevent
Chinese robots?
these two nations
Let's dust
from
off the
making a
crystal
lot
ball
of deals
and take a look and see what
regarding
I'm
nuclear
seeing
weapons
for
because they had a shared
2025
incentive
and beyond.
to not have a
But
nuclear
before
war.
we do that,
And
let's take
America
a
and
quick
China
look
have
at
a
what I
shared
predicted
incentive
last
Last
year.
July,
Let's see if it came true.
car
For it to be
dealership
humans who
associations in one of
Decide whether
China's
you want to
have a
richest
future
regions
drop it or not.
posted
with
a
a
joint
bunch of
letter.
What did I do on
psychopath
last year's
robots
It
running the
stated
show.
the pressures they face
was
from high
President
industries
Trump,
and
I'd
price
like to
wars
turn to
in
the
the auto
words
industry.
of someone who is widely
Since
referred
2023,
as the godfather
Chinese
of
EV
AI,
brands started slashing
Jeffrey
prices
Hinton,
to
who
seize
said in
market
a
share.
recent interview with the Big Technology
The
podcast
number
that
of
AI is
electric
coming
car
up with
makers
new
swelled
forms
to
of intelligence
487 at its
exceeding
peak
that
in
of humans.
2017.
that
backed
they
by
saw
strong
was
government
come up with an
support.
interesting mathematical proof of one of the Erdős
This competition,
inventions
however,
that,
left only 129 companies in the market by 2024,
it wasn't
and the
just
number is expected to shrink to 15
that's
by
the thin end of a
2030.
wedge. I believe, for example, in areas like mathematics,
Likewise,
because it's
some
a
of
closed
China's
system,
solar panel makers
you
are
don't
counting
need
their
data.
losses
You can
on
just make
slashing
conjectures and see if you can
prices
prove
amid
them.
oversupply.
You keep on like that. In that sense, it's a
Will
bit
the
like
robotics
AlphaGo, where you can play
industry
against
face the
yourself.
same fate?
I think it's going to get very smart fairly
Yeah,
quickly.
we could see a
Within
very
10 or
similar
20 years,
dynamic
it may
where
be producing
China's
novel math that
exports
people
grow,
can't understand.
and China
Professor
starts to
Tegmark,
protect the
if you
position
could talk
and
about
really
this,
even the
this
financial
so-called
viability
what's
of
referred to as
companies in other markets,
recursive
and at the same time, the
intelligence,
Chinese
and
companies,
then tell us
despite
what
their
you
success
found
in
in
market
your
share, still have
recent
very thin profit
report
margins
card,
and struggle to be
wherein
profitable.
artificial
So I think you
intelligence
could,
experts
see a
rated
similar dynamic playing out
leading
in
AI
the
companies on key safety and security domains. It seems from your results that none of the 9 did especially well.
Yeah, that's right. And as a professor, those are not the kind of grades I would like my students to get. The term recursive self-improvement simply refers to an AI that is so smart that it can improve itself. So today,
now we need to do something about
when you go from
well.
ChatGPT
Late
4
last
to
year,
ChatGPT 5, there were a lot of humans involved in that work,
of a
right?
market bubble.
Recursive self-improvement is when ChatGPT
typical adoption curve,
7,
kind of
can
this
just
S
press a
curve, right,
button,
where you're
and
building
come
the
back
fundamental
later and
capabilities of
create a
technology, you're
ChatGPT 8.
investing a lot, but you're not really
That's kind of
generating any
basically
value.
digital gain of
And then
function
you find
research, where
kind of the right
before
use
long,
cases,
we
and
might
you
be
get to
as
a
much,
point where
the AI might
the
be as much
technology
smarter than
does
us
well enough
as
that people
we are
start to
smarter
adopt
than
it, get a payback,
mice or
and
snails. And
companies
it was
learn
very
from each other,
interesting.
see
I
the
read almost
competitors
all the
adopting it,
comments,
so that S-curve can accelerate
the
very quickly.
signatories of
And then
that.
at some point, the
Of those
development
thousands plus
pace of the
signatories from
technology
the
peters
competing
off,
companies that
it
signed that
gets
you
harder
mentioned.
to
It's
find
really quite gripping
improvements.
to see how so many of the workers,
I would say
companies
human is
are
still very
really
much at the flat part,
terrified. It just
at the
shines
bottom of
through
that
in what
S-curve.
they've
To me,
written.
it's still a question of
Many of them are
high
right
will
that
that
they think we're
S-curve be,
2 years
right?
away
And that
from
depends on how many
really
use cases you
control
change
of
the
this.
time.
I think the reason that's
But for
lost
China
on
to win the
the broader
humanoid-robot
public
race,
and our
it
politicians
must
is
also
because
sell to the world.
we all
However,
noticed 4 years ago
Chinese
that
technology
computers went
faces
from not being
growing
able to
scrutiny
talk
in
to
parts of
being
the
able to
West.
talk.
For example,
But
several
much fewer
European
people have
countries
noticed that since
restricted
then,
or phased
AI
out
went
Chinese
from kind of
suppliers
school
from their
level
5G
to
networks.
college level to professor
And
level.
Chinese EVs have drawn data privacy and
Nobel laureate
security
level and
concerns in
beyond
some
in
markets.
certain areas.
Smart
Winning
robots
now,
could face
winning the
even
gold
more
medal in the International
concerns.
Mathematics Olympiad, proving new mathematical theorems and so on.
First, cameras
And
and other
it's getting
sensors are required for
good
robots. They can't
at
operate,
writing programs,
they can't
which
navigate,
is
and they
exactly
can't do
why
tasks without
you see these
sensory
companies
input.
betting so hard on having
Some of that
AI
information
replace
can be
their own
processed
workers and then
locally,
improve
removed,
itself.
deleted.
There has
Some
to
of
be
it
a red
probably
line
needs to be
that
transported to the
nobody
cloud,
is allowed
be able to
to
train
do.
on new use
recursive
cases. Once it's in the
self-improvement.
cloud, could that be sent back to
Professor
wherever in the
Tegmark, if
world,
I could
right?
just ask,
So there's this
with
data
respect
security.
to what you're
So
referring to,
does
the sheer
factory
speed at
Switzerland
which
or in the
AI
US want to have
has
Chinese
developed,
robots,
which seems
or
to
at
have
least Chinese
stunned
software, maybe they'll accept
even
Chinese
its
hardware, but not Chinese
pioneers.
software.
I mean, it was
Same
10
for a
years
hospital
ago
in
that
America,
artificial
where they're
intelligence
willing to accept
beat
a Chinese
the
machine vision
game
system
Go,
that
a
can process patient data.
5,500-year-old game
In a Pew
by
survey,
what's referred to as
respondents in the
Move
West tend not to
37.
trust China
If you could
to
talk about the
regulate AI.
significance of that,
The bars on the
and
left
what
of
you
this chart
think
show the levels
accounts
of distrust.
for the
However,
both the scale
people
and the
surveyed in
rapidity
Indonesia and Africa
with
are less
which
wary.
AI is developing and
So I feel like there
expanding.
will be significant constraints related
the
to
significance
geopolitics.
of
America
that
will
Go
not
game, I guess,
accept
Lisa Dahl was
Chinese software
that
and a lot of
And then the
hardware
last prediction
components.
I made
that
had to do
kind of
with
put the nail in the
use
coffin
of
for a lot of
cybersecurity
people in this notion that AI can never be
in the
creative.
future.
AI.
And
In other words, companies
also
there's some
to
things that human
robotics.
intelligence
And
only
so
they're
China's
gonna be
ability to
wondering,
sell,
how
to
can I
export
use
robots
And
to
the
certain markets
reason
is
that things have
constrained
gone
by
so
that.
crazy fast is,
be
you know,
attacked. That
if
they're
While the
you and
country
I had the
advances in
ability to
robotics,
just
turned out to
press
there
a
are
button
fears
and
that
our brain would
humanoid
be 10
robots
times
will
bigger,
take
and then it would
over
be
the
100 times
jobs of
bigger and
human
1,000
beings.
times bigger.
This is the
There are
reason
some
if we could read the whole
123
internet
million
to have
factory
conversations.
workers in
I talk about a lot
China,
of other
And every book ever
and
written,
AI and
remember it all,
robots
you know.
could
For
hit
all the clients I've
70%
Of course
of
we
the
could
sector.
be much more
in the
intelligent.
last year.
On the flip
But we have
side,
these
How am I
physical
going to
limits to our
robotics
bodies,
industry
whereas
can also be a
with
source of
machines it's not
employment.
like
I
that.
think there's also this other part
If you
that
can't
This
fit enough
vocational school
computational
for
power in your
robotics
laptop,
opened in
well,
2015,
taken a data center the size of
to
an
great industrial
aircraft
robots.
hangar and fill it up with machines and
Well,
gigawatt of power and
we could use it to
give it everything ever written
an online
to learn from.
Max Tegmark, we thank you for being with us, professor conducting AI and physics research at MIT. As part of the Institute for Artificial Intelligence and Fundamental Interactions, author of the New York Times bestseller, Life 3.0, Being Human in the Age of Artificial Intelligence. I hope this conversation is just the beginning. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for watching Democracy Now! on YouTube. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to make sure you never miss a video. And for more of our audience-supported journalism, go to democracynow.org, where you can download our news app, sign up for our newsletter, subscribe to the daily podcast, and so much more. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman. Calls are growing across the United States for moratoriums on new AI data centers over their impact on energy costs, water and land use, the U.S. economy, greenhouse gas emissions, and democracy. Unnamed state lawmakers recently approved the first statewide moratorium, but the governor, Janet Mills, vetoed the legislation. A new Gallup poll released today shows 7 out of 10 Americans oppose data centers being built near them, and the opposition spans the political spectrum. In Utah, residents are fighting plans to build what would be the largest data center in the world.
At the same time,
in Box Elder
an American
County.
company has already
If
secured
built, the
$18
facility
million
would generate and
in military
consume more
contracts for its
energy
humanoid robot.
than the entire state of Utah.
In 2024,
The
the
proposed
United
complex
Nations
would cover
passed a
an area more
resolution
than 2.5
to address
times
the
the size of
negative
Manhattan.
consequences and impact
Estimates
of
show
autonomous
the
weapon
project
systems.
could increase Utah's greenhouse gas emissions by 50%. On Capitol Hill, Vermont's Independent Senator Bernie Sanders and Democratic Congressmember Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez have introduced legislation to impose a temporary national moratorium on new artificial intelligence data center construction.
Industry, for example. So
More than 100
this is
local
also going to be
communities
important
across
for
12
other parts
states
of
have
Chinese
already
civilization.
enacted local moratoriums on data centers,
According to a
and
report by
Congress
Local
itself has a
Standard,
moral obligation
the
to stand
adoption
with
of
them
humanoids
and
into our
stop
daily
big tech
lives is
from
expected
ruining
to
their
accelerate from
communities.
2035.
Our legislation in the House and the Senate
The
would hit the
front runner
brakes
in
on
the robotics
construction
race
of new
would have
data
first mover
centers
advantage.
until we address
And it is
several
a
of the
position
key
China
areas of
is
harm
going to
AI
claim.
poses.
problem for us, and I expect
We
this
go
to
now to North Carolina, where we're joined by Esther Taylor, writer, organizer, co-founder of the Debt Collective. She co-wrote a new piece for The Guardian headline, "The fight against AI data centers isn't just about tech, it's about democracy." Esther Taylor and Naomi Klein's forthcoming book out this September is titled End Times Fascism and the Fight for the Living World. Esther, welcome back to Democracy Now! Why don't you start off just by talking about what these AI data centers are, this largest one in Utah. I was just in Middleburg, Virginia last night. Every other person was raising this issue with me, very critical issue in Virginia right now. Explain what they are.
Whether it's for 6G or
Thanks
for
for
other
having me. Yeah, data
components,
centers are essentially the backbone of the AI revolution. Data centers are new every time you use the internet. You think data centers, so they've been around for a while, but they have been supercharged by the push towards artificial intelligence. Virginia is indeed the data center hub in this country, but they're spreading rapidly across the United States. Sam Altman, the head of OpenAI, has said that perhaps we'll have to cover the entire world in data centers. And it's about the drive for compute, for computing power. And they are often on an absolutely enormous scale. Like you described the data center being proposed in Utah, which would actually use twice as much energy as the entire state. There's one being proposed in Michigan that is going to be as big as 32 NFL football fields. And they use incredible amounts of energy, often gas fossil fuel there being used as an excuse to put even old coal factories and coal production back online. And there are many negative consequences for communities, from emissions. Often they are powered by temporary gas turbines that are being used almost on a permanent basis. So there's air pollution, carcinogens, there's light and noise pollution. People are absolutely tormented by the sounds of these huge warehouses of whirring computers. There is water use issues depending on where it's located. And then there's just the question of what are people getting in return? Because these are massive quote-unquote factories, but there are no jobs. And a lot of harms for the people who live near them, and larger harms for our society.
But explain why it requires so much energy. What does it have to do with AI? Why does artificial intelligence require this factor?
Just the nature of what they call compute, right? The computers themselves require an incredible amount of energy to run and then to be cooled. So they have to be kept in a stable temperature setting. So there's just energy to cool these machines because they produce an enormous amount of heat. And so that's another problem with them. And this is helping to blow through whatever now long gone climate commitments we have. But this drive to AI has been when you look at Silicon Valley, they say the drive to AI is why we can no longer meet our climate commitments. Right, all of these companies, Google, Meta, presented themselves as climate champions, and AI has caused them to throw those ideas out the window.
One of the primary investors of the proposed mega data center in Utah is Kevin O'Leary, better known as Mr. Wonderful on the reality TV show Shark Tank. This is O'Leary defending the project and dismissing the protesters.
My journey starts in
Well, I'm actually the only developer of data centers on Earth that graduated from environmental studies. So I'm pretty aware of what these concerns are. They are around air, water use, heat, noise, pollution. So sustainability is at the heart of what we do in terms of all these proposals. We're not just Utah. We have 10,000 acres in Alberta, Canada, with the same concerns. And so we search for the best technology. There's many air-cooled turbines now, so you're blending in air-cooled versus water. There's so many different ways to generate power. We can also put a percentage of the power generation through solar, wind, and batteries, because the battery technology is 10x more efficient than it was just 5 years ago. So that's very helpful because it makes the cost of energy lower. So no one, if you're an environmentalist and you don't care about that stuff, of course you protest, and that's what happens. I noted what's happening in Utah right now is we think over 90% of the protesters are actually not people that live in Utah or Box Elder County. They're being bussed in.
That's Kevin O'Leary, better known as Mr. Wonderful on the reality TV show Shark Tank. Your response, Mr. Tank.
He should be called Mr. Full of It. I mean, his claims are absolutely absurd. You could build data centers that were connected to sustainable renewable energy sources. That is not what these tech companies are doing, because they are rushing to compete to be the company that controls this industry. So, take somebody like Elon Musk, who has built 3 data centers, supercomputers around Memphis, Tennessee. One of them, for example, the first one uses enough energy to power almost 300,000 homes. He's using these very high-polluting gas turbines. Colossus 2 is the second supercomputer. Is called uses enough energy for 2 million homes. This is a guy who presented himself as a green champion for many years, but he has not built these computers, these supercomputers, these data centers in a way that reflects those values at all. And absolutely, the point about this protest movement against data centers being not grassroots, being paid is absolutely absurd. What's incredible about this movement is the grassroots nature of it and how it's bringing together people from across the political spectrum. It's bringing together folks who live in Memphis, Tennessee, rural farmers, just concerned citizens who are saying, what are we getting out of these? You know, there used to be a bargain when a factory came to town. You would get jobs, even if maybe it emitted some pollution, had tax breaks. These massive warehouses maybe produce 30, 50, 100 jobs at best, often low-wage jobs doing things like security or sanitation. And now there's even companies who are saying that they are going to actually provide security services with robot dogs, right? With robots. So there'll be robots guarding the computers. And so people are rightly saying, why should we support this? And that is what is causing this amazing movement to rise up and to block these developments across the country.
Esther, one University of Buffalo professor in environment and sustainability, Holly Buck, recently wrote an article in Jacobin headlined "Democratic Governance of AI is the Real Solution," in which she argues against the idea of a moratorium on data centers. She writes, "A moratorium on AI data centers is a terrible idea, one that poses serious equity concerns. A moratorium springs from the desire to stop the concentration of wealth, but ironically, it's likely to exacerbate it. It's a massive strategic blunder for the left, and we should think through the global justice implications and follow-on effects. We should be wary of proposals that would send burdens elsewhere. Under neoliberal capitalism, industries offshore environmental harms to places with weaker governance, cheaper labor costs, and fewer environmental safeguards," unquote. Buck says AI should be regulated as a public utility. What's your response to her argument on a moratorium?
Yeah, the Guardian piece I wrote with Saul Levin was a response to her criticism of this movement, which she said was a dead end, and her criticism of the idea of a data center moratorium. First, I want to say that I like the idea of democratic governance of AI, but you need to have leverage to have any kind of democratic control. I think it's important to pause and just note how undemocratic the rollout of AI has been so far. Nobody has asked for this. You cited polling. This is incredibly unpopular technology. 80% of Republicans and independents, of people who voted for Donald Trump, say they want more regulations on AI, even if it slows things down. Last year, there was a poll that said only 10% of people are excited about where this technology is going. And that's because the people who control it, who own it, have been very clear that they don't have democracy in mind. They define AGI, artificial general intelligence, this is OpenAI's definition, as autonomous systems that can do, essentially do human work. And so this is a human job elimination machine, and maybe a human elimination machine in the sense that AI is also, is not just automating workplace labor, but also, you know, impersonating human beings and trying to be your best friend and your companion and take over human life. So this is not, and this again is not something that people have wanted. You know, the Silicon Valley has gotten very aggressively behind Donald Trump, who has said, you know, he's going to block all attempts to regulate or control this technology. That we're in an accelerationist mindset. So you only can wield democratic power in opposition to that, if you are, you know, an ordinary citizen who doesn't have a direct line to Donald Trump or millions of dollars to buy him off, by engaging in protest, by engaging in disruptive action. And data centers provide local focal points, local choke points where people can come together and push back on the billionaire big tech agenda and say no. And it has absolutely changed the terrain, I think, of the political conversation. That's critical. I think there are some people, a good faith critique is, well, is this the most tactical thing that people can do? And I would say it is tactical because it provides, again, people a place to meet locally and a way to make their discontent known. But I think where I have another disagreement with Buck is, you know, I think there's a question of how much we want AI in our lives, right? You know, I think part of her argument is that it's a bit Luddite to resist this technology. It's inevitable. It's the future. Everyone should have access to it in every facet of their existence. And I think that many people are more skeptical than that. We're saying, do we really want AI in our schools, teaching our children? Do we really want AI talking to our children? And do we want AI to be our boss at work? And there is a deeper debate there about where we want to allow this technology to be. To me, that's part of what it means to have democratic governance over AI, is to say, no, we don't need this technology to take over every facet of our existence, from the industrial to the intimate.
And finally, very briefly, can you explain the tech sector fighting back against the anti-data center movement? You write, quote, about concerted PR efforts flooding elections with dark money, or even shadier tactics in this last minute.
Yes, Bernie Sanders recently said that by his estimate, the AI sector has put $400 million into elections already in 2026. They are also trying to use other tactics, PR tactics, to smear protesters. For example, that idea that this is actually a paid movement, is not a grassroots movement, is part of their campaign against the data center uprising. And, it seems to not be working at this point because there is such grassroots momentum. People are coming together from all walks of life and realizing they have more in common around this issue. They might have voted for Donald Trump, they might be a Democrat, but they're saying this is not the future that we want. We want a future where we can breathe the air, we can drink the water, where we have jobs, where our kids have jobs, where we have a livable future. Naomi Klein and I, in our forthcoming book, call this a new pro-life movement. We don't want to be subjected to robot overlords. So there's going to be pushback, undoubtedly more pushback to come from the tech sector, and I hope that people who are sympathetic to the idea of regulating this technology can appreciate what a strategic movement this is. The data center fight is giving us leverage to create the conditions where hopefully the Democratic Party can come in and seize the moment and propose not just smart regulation, but things like a jobs guarantee, insisting that this technology is tied to green energy and the like. This is creating conditions for the changes that we need to push back on Silicon Valley and its authoritarian agenda.
Thanks for watching Democracy Now! On YouTube. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to make sure you never miss a video. And for more of our audience-supported journalism, go to democracynow.org, where you can download our news app, sign up for our newsletter, subscribe to the daily podcast, and so much more. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy. In this holiday special, we continue with the journalist Karen Howe, author of the new book, Empire of AI, Dreams and Nightmares in Sam Altman's OpenAI. She came into our studio in May. She talked about how AI will impact workers.
One of the things that we have seen is this technology is already having a huge impact on jobs. Not necessarily because the technology itself is really capable of replacing jobs, but it is perceived as capable enough that executives are laying off workers. And we need some kind of more guardrails to actually prevent these companies from continuing to try and develop labor automating technologies and try to shift them to producing labor assisted technologies. So OpenAI, their definition of what they call artificial general intelligence is highly autonomous systems that outperform humans in most economically valuable work. So they explicitly state that they are trying to automate jobs away. I mean, what is economically valuable work but the things that people do to get paid? But there's this really great book called Power and Progress by MIT economists Jeroen Acemoglu and Simon Johnson, who mention that technology development, all technology revolutions, they take a labor automating approach not because of inevitability, but because the people at the top choose to automate those jobs away. They choose to design the technology so that they can sell it to executives and say, you can shrink your costs by laying off all these workers and using our AI services instead. But in the past, we've seen studies that, for example, suggest that if you develop an AI tool that a doctor uses rather rather than replacing the doctor, you will actually get better health care for patients. You will get better cancer diagnoses. If you develop an AI tool that teachers can use rather than just an AI tutor that replaces the teacher, your kids will get better educational outcomes. And so that's what I mean by labor assistive and labor.
And explain what you mean, because I think a lot of people don't even understand artificial intelligence. And when you say replace the doctor, what are you talking about?
Right. So these companies, they try to develop a technology that they position as an everything machine that can do anything. And so they will try to say, you can use this, you can talk to ChatGPT for therapy. No, you cannot. ChatGPT is not a licensed therapist, and in fact, these models actually spew lots of medical misinformation, and there have been lots of examples of actually users being psychologically harmed by the model because the model will continue to reinforce self-harming behaviors, and we've even had cases where children who speak to chatbots and develop huge emotional relationships with these chatbots have actually killed themselves after using these chatbot systems. But that's what I mean when these companies are trying to develop labor automating tools. They're positioning it as you can now hire this tool instead of hire a worker.
So you've talked about Sam Altman, and in part one we touched on who he is, but I'd like you to go more deeply into who Sam Altman is, how he exploded onto the U.S. scene, testifying before Congress, actually warning about the dangers of AI, so that really protected him in a way. People seeing him as a prophet, that's a P-R-O-P-H-E-T, but now we can talk about the other kind of prophet, P-R-O-F-I-T. And how OpenAI was formed. How is OpenAI different from AI?
OpenAI is a company, I mean, it was originally founded as a nonprofit, as I mentioned, and Altman specifically, when he was thinking about how do I make a fundamental AI research lab that is going to make a big splash, he chose to make it a nonprofit because he identified that if he could not compete on capital, and he was relatively late to the game, Google already had a monopoly on a lot of top AI research talent at the time. If he could not compete on capital and he could not compete in terms of being a first mover, he needed some other kind of ingredient there to really recruit talent, recruit public goodwill, and establish a name for OpenAI. So he identified a mission. He identified, let me make this a nonprofit and let me give it a really compelling mission. So the mission of OpenAI is to ensure artificial general intelligence benefits all of humanity. And one of the quotes that I open my book with is this quote that Sam Altman cited himself in 2013 in his blog. He was an avid blogger back in the day, talking about his learnings on business and strategy and Silicon Valley startup life. And the quote is, successful people build companies, more successful people build countries, the most successful people build religions. And then he reflects on that quote in his blog, saying, it appears to me that the best way to build a religion is actually to build a company.
And so talk about how Altman was then forced out of the company and then came back. And also, I just found it so fascinating that you were able to speak with so many OpenAI workers. You thought there was a kind of total ban on you.
Yeah, exactly. So I was the first journalist to profile OpenAI. I embedded within the company for 3 days in 2019, and then my profile published in 2020 for MIT Technology Review. And at the time, I identified in the profile this tension that I was seeing, where it was a nonprofit by name, but behind the scenes, a lot of the public values that they espoused were actually the opposite of how they operated. So they espoused transparency, they were highly secretive, they espoused collaborativeness, they were highly competitive, and they espoused that they had no commercial intent, but in fact, it seemed like they had just gotten a $1 billion investment from Microsoft. It seems like they were rapidly going to develop commercial intent, and so I wrote put that into the profile, and OpenAI was deeply unhappy about it, and they would not refuse to talk to me for 3 years. And so when OpenAI took up this mission of artificial general intelligence, they were able to essentially shape and mold what they wanted this technology to be based on what is most convenient for them. But when they identified it, it was at a time when scientists really looked down on this term even, AGI, and so they have absorbed just a small group of self-identified AGI believers. This is why I call it quasi-religious. Because there's no scientific evidence that we can actually develop AGI, the people who are have this strong conviction that they will do it and that it's going to happen soon, it is just purely based on belief, and they talk about it as a belief too, but there are two factions within this belief system of the AGI religion. There are people who think AGI is going to bring us to utopia, and there are people who think AGI is going to destroy all of humanity. Both of them believe that it is possible, it's coming soon, and therefore they conclude that they need to be the ones to control the technology and not democratize it. And this is ultimately what leads to your question of what happened when Sam Altman was fired and rehired. Through the history of OpenAI, there's been a lot of clashing between the boomers and doomers about who should actually...
Boomers and doomers.
The boomers and the doomers.
Those that say it'll bring us the apocalypse.
Utopia, boomers, and those that say it'll destroy humanity, the doomers. And they have clashed relentlessly and aggressively about how quickly to build the technology, how quickly to release the technology.
And I want to take this up until today in January, the Trump administration announcing the Stargate project, a $500 billion project to boost AI infrastructure in the United States. This is OpenAI's Sam Altman speaking alongside President Trump.
I think this will be the most important project of this era, and as Masa said, for AGI to get built here, to create hundreds of thousands of jobs, to create a new industry centered here. We wouldn't be able to do this without you, Mr. President.
He also there referred to AGI, artificial general intelligence. Explain what happened here and what this is, and has it actually happened?
So Altman, before Trump was elected, he already was sensing through observation that it was possible that the administration would shift, and that he would need to start politicking quite heavily to ingratiate himself to a new administration. Altman is very strategic. He was under a lot of pressure at the time as well, because his original co-founder Elon Musk now has great beef with him. Musk feels like Altman used his name and his money to set up OpenAI, and then he got nothing in return. So Musk had been suing him, still suing him, and suddenly became first buddy of the Trump administration. So Altman basically cleverly orchestrated this announcement, where, by the way, the announcement's quite strange, because President Trump is not, it's not the U.S. government giving $500 billion. It's private investment coming into the U.S. From places like SoftBank, which is one of the largest investment funds run by Masayoshi Son, a Japanese businessman who made a lot of his wealth from the previous tech era. So it's not even the U.S. government that's providing this money.
And take that right through to now, that Gulf trip that Elon Musk was on, but so was Sam Altman, to the fury of Elon Musk. And then a deal was sealed in Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, so
it didn't include Elon Musk, but was about OpenAI.
Exactly. So Altman has continued to try and use the U.S. government as a way to get access to more places and more powerful spaces to build out this empire. And one of the things, because OpenAI's computational infrastructure needs are so aggressive, I had an OpenAI employee tell me, we're running running out of land and power. So they are running out of resources in the U.S., which is why they're trying to get access to land and energy in other places. The Middle East has a lot of land and has a lot of energy, and they're willing to strike deals. And that is why Altman was part of that trip looking to strike a deal. And the deal that they struck was to build a massive data center or multiple data centers in the Middle East using their land and their energy. But one of the things that OpenAI has recently rolled out, they call it the OpenAI for Countries program, and it is this idea that they want to install OpenAI hardware and software in places around the world, and explicitly says we want to build democratic AI rails. We want to install our hardware and software as a foundation of democratic AI globally, so that we can stop China from installing authoritarian AI globally. But the thing that he does not acknowledge is that there is nothing democratic about what he's doing. You know, the Atlantic executive editor says we need to call these companies for what they are. They are techno-authoritarians. They do not ask the public for any perspective on how they develop the technology, what data they train the technology on, where they develop these data centers. In fact, these data centers are often developed in the cover of night under shell companies. Like Meta recently entered New Mexico under a shell company named Greater Kudu LLC. Greater Kudu LLC, and once the deal was actually closed and the residents couldn't do anything about it anymore, that's when it was revealed, surprise, we're Meta, and you're going to get a data center that drinks all of your fresh water.
And then there was this whole controversy in Memphis around a data center.
Yes, so that is the data center that Elon Musk is building. So meanwhile, Musk is saying Altman is terrible, everyone should use my AI, and of course his AI is also being developed using the same environmental and public health costs. So he built this massive supercomputer called Colossus in Memphis, Tennessee that's training Grok, the chatbot that people can access through X, and that is being powered by around 35 unlicensed methane gas turbines that are pumping thousands of tons of toxic air pollutants into the greater Memphis community. And that community has long suffered a lack of access to clean air, a fundamental human right.
So I want to go to, interestingly, Sam Altman testifying in front of Congress about solutions to the high energy consumption of artificial intelligence.
Sounds like a bad side.
In the short term, I think it probably looks like
unfortunately, in this case, it's actually happening.
Although
and we can expect to see more of it going forward.
In the medium term, I hope it's advanced to
improve customer service. Customers are using
more
AI
energy is important well beyond AI.
So that's OpenAI's Sam Altman. This is testifying before the Senate and talking about everything from solar to nuclear power, something that was fought in the United States by environmental activists for decades. So you have these huge old nuclear power plants, but then he's saying you can't make them safe no matter how small and smart you make them.
In this video,
this is one of the things, the many things that I'm concerned about with the current trajectory of AI development. This is a second order, tertiary order effect, is that because these companies are trying to claim that the AI development approach they took doesn't have climate harms, they are explicitly evoking nuclear again and again and again as nuclear will solve the problem. And it has been effective. I've talked with certain AI researchers who thought the problem was solved because of nuclear. And in order to try and actually build more and more nuclear plants, they are lobbying governments to try and unwind the regulatory structure around nuclear power plant building. I mean, this is like crazy on so many levels that they're not just trying to develop the AI technology recklessly, they're also trying to lay down infrastructure and nuclear infrastructure in this move fast, break things ideology.
But for those who are environmentalists and have long propose nuclear, will they be sucked in by the solar alternative?
Exactly.
So data centers have to run 24/7, so they cannot actually run on just renewables. That is why the companies keep trying to evoke nuclear as the solve-all. But solar does not actually work when you do not have sufficient enough energy storage solutions for that 24/7 operation.
We're talking to Karen Howe, author of Empire of AI, Dreams and Nightmares, and Sam Altman's OpenAI. You mentioned earlier China. You live in Hong Kong. You've covered Chinese AI, US AI for years. Explain what's happening in China right now.
Website that's going to lock you out after 3 bad attempts or something along those lines.
I have to sort of explain the dynamic between China and the U.S. first. So China and the U.S. are the largest hubs for AI research. They are the largest concentration of AI research talent globally. China, other than Silicon Valley, China really is the only other rival in terms of talent density and the amount of capital investment and the amount of infrastructure that is going into AI development.